Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you on this Saturday evening from the National Weather Service on behalf through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is April 16th, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov and it'll bring up a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And you can click on the map and get weather forecasts, watches, warnings, advisories, and much more information for anywhere in the country. Right now we have frost advisories and freeze warnings for parts of the Ohio Valley, the Texas, Oklahoma Panhandle, red flag warnings for fire weather danger there across parts of Colorado, northeast Arizona, northwest New Mexico, and then an area of winter weather advisories and a few winter storm warnings from North Dakota across Montana back into Oregon. Well, the weather coming up here in our headlines, we're going to see a couple areas of low pressure, one in the central and then another in the lower Bering Sea. It'll be working its way eastward here as we go through the next day or so. Continue to see a fairly large area of high pressure anchored over northwest Canada. It'll build to about 1045 millibars come early Sunday morning. And areas that have clear to partly cloudy skies will be able to see the full pink moon of April. The actual full moon occurred this afternoon, but it'll still be plainly full looking here tonight. We're also going to be watching an active sunspot group rotate around from the northeast limb of the sun in the next day or so. And that could lead to some solar storms and activity that could trigger aurora here for the latter half of this month. Could be a more active period just in time before our daylight, as it continues to grow. The aurora viewing season is drawing to a close by the time we get here toward the end of the month, early May. Well, looking at a few of the sky cameras here, the FAA webcams, Wainwright continues to see some blowing snow after the state low temperature this morning of 6 below. They're creeping upwards, 1 above at 1 p.m. They're, as of last check, up to about 3 above. Togiak out there along the southwest coast, a mix of some light rain, snow showers there, and a temperature of 37 degrees as areas of the southwest coast extending out into the central Bering continue to have that area of low pressure linger there, but at least on the process there of weakening. So here's the sun, the solar disk as it appeared today. There's an active sunspot group that's kind of up toward the left quadrant there of the sun that's going to rotate into view soon here in the next day or so, which could lead to solar and geomagnetic storms with auroras perhaps visible here at some point the latter half of this month. So keep your eyes open there, as skies at times will be clear. This time of year is generally the clearest time of year for especially the mainland of Alaska and other areas as well. Looking at satellite imagery, we see a band of cloudiness coming up there from just south of Kodiak Island. It does have some rain, and then an area of low pressure curl in the clouds there to the northwest of St. Paul, just south of St. Matthew. That's the area of low pressure that continues to sit and spin out there in the central Bering, and it will slowly weaken. And then another low, it'll be coming up from the North Pacific through the western half into the central Aleutians later tonight and tomorrow. There is another area of low pressure there in the North Pacific, well south of the Gulf, but that feature is going to kind of sit just south of the Gulf the rest of this weekend. But there's extensive low cloudiness across much of the Gulf, despite the higher pressure located up there farther north. And as we go into later tonight and early on Sunday, we see that a little stronger low working its way through the western central Aleutians. That feature will continue eastward on Sunday, bringing wind and mainly rain to the central and to the eastern Aleutians, though there could be a little mixed precipitation, especially in the higher elevations there of the Alaska Peninsula as it makes some headway eastward. And then still generally high pressure there through the middle upper Yukon Valley, northern half of the state. Just a few pockets of a few lingering light snow showers, flurries in through the mountains, south central areas back into areas of the coastal mountains there, British Columbia. but generally dry conditions prevailing across much of the mainland into the day on Wednesday, though some showers could creep up there along areas of the North Pacific and Gulf Coast from the southern Kenai, Kodiak Island across the Alaska Peninsula and into the eastern Aleutians. Low temperatures on Sunday morning could dip to around or a bit below freezing there in the Panhandle, especially with any clearing. Same thing for south central areas. Temperatures, though, with the sun, areas that do get sun back up into the 40s, even a few lower 50s down toward Craig, Ketchikan, and on Monday morning lows a bit chillier, single digits up there, the Copper River Basin, near freezing Anchorage, as well as Homer. And then Monday afternoon temperatures should be getting up into the 40s in many areas, except for some of those colder spots with some elevation or there in the Copper River Basin. Should be back up to about 39, 40-ish there at Glen Ellen. Temperatures will be sub-zero, at least single digits below zero along the Alcan border, Yukon Flats, as well as up there along the northern Arctic coast. Daytime highs should get back up near 40 or so from Fairbanks, extending southwestward, especially on the south side of the Yukon River. And then Monday morning lows maybe coming up just a few degrees there along the Arctic coast, and single digits generally above zero there in the middle upper Yukon Valley. And then look for temperatures to warm as we work our way up through the Yukon River Basin, places like Galena, as well as Tanana, on up toward Fairbanks, low and mid 40s. A few spots could even flirt with, say, 50 degrees if you can get a little downslope off the Alaska Range. And then back through the southwest interior, lows Sunday morning will generally be below freezing, but near or above freezing across the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. Highs Sunday afternoon with a little sun, upper Kuskokwim Basin should get back up at least in the lower 40s, some mid 40s possible. King salmon there at 46 for a high. And then Monday morning lows will be modifying a bit with the help of a little cloud cover there along the southwestern coastal interior, and lows generally above freezing across the Alaska Peninsula and extending out the length into the Aleutians. Monday afternoon highs will creep upward a bit, looking at places like Bethel, Aniak as we go up through the Kuskokwim River Basin. Mid and even some upper 40s will be possible. 47 there at McGrath, as well as down there toward King Salmon and Bethel. And looking at the extended temperature outlook, this is the Climate Prediction Center 6 to 10 day outlook for April 22nd through April 26th, is calling for temperatures to be a bit on the cooler side, averaging below normal across the north through the central interior, the southeast, and then into the Panhandle. It may end up averaging a little bit above normal there in the southwest. That would include especially centered on the lower Kuskokwim Delta, including Bethel. And then precipitation-wise, as we are now in our typically driest time of the year, we expect precipitation to average below normal from the central Brooks Range, including the Arctic coast, southwestward down the length of the Yukon River to the southwest, both the Y-K deltas. So we're not anticipating any big wet systems. And then out through the southeast there, through the Panhandle, precipitation could average a little bit above normal, but at least in the shorter term, we don't see any big Gulf lows impacting anywhere there along the Gulf Coast, and perhaps some clearer skies for some of that late season aurora viewing.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you're a pilot and having a flight planned Sunday into Monday, still the main weather players will be general low pressure out across the Bering, with high pressure in northwest Canada, and then in between much of the mainland enjoying either VFR or MVFR conditions. Sunday morning, widespread IFR conditions are expected along and just off the southwest coast from the eastern and up through the central and northern Bering, all the way up to near the Bering Strait. We have a broad area of IFR conditions, western half of the Aleutians, as yet another low will be working its way out of the North Pacific across the Aleutian chain as we go through later Sunday and Monday. Low up there just near and west of St. Matthew will continue to weaken. By Sunday afternoon, still broad area of IFR conditions extending from near the Bering Strait across St. Lawrence and then down through the central and lower Bering, including the central into the Aleutian, eastern Aleutian chain. We do still have some MVFR conditions, especially south of the Alaska Range and along the southeast Alcan border. Monday morning, there could be some pockets of IFR as we get down toward areas just west there of the Copper River Basin, eastern Kenai, but more notably, again, widespread IFR from the Bering Strait across St. Lawrence down through St. Matthew, the Pribilof Islands into the eastern Aleutians and the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And that area kind of contracts, but still centered there on the Bering Sea and parts of the eastern Aleutian and the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Past conditions on Sunday, Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Pass. We'll see VFR conditions there along the eastern half of the Brooks Range. Going further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill may see MVFR conditions to start out there Sunday morning, but becoming VFR. And as we head up toward Rainy Pass, same thing, MVFR becoming VFR. Generally, VFR conditions are expected there at Windy Pass in the central Alaska Range. And as we move east, Isabel VFR as well. And a little further east along toward the Alcan border, there could be MVFR conditions holding, even little pockets of IFR not out of the question. And Tanita Pass dropping a little further south and west. Look for VFR conditions becoming MVFR, especially along the eastern half, east entrance of that pass. And for Portage Pass, similarly, generally VFR conditions there throughout the pass Sunday morning, becoming MVFR along the eastern third, east entrance areas. And then in the northern panhandle at Chilkoot and White, we do anticipate MVFR conditions throughout Sunday. Freezing levels, the surface freezing line runs along the outer panhandle through the northern Gulf Coast across the southwest entrance there to the Alaska Peninsula back through the central Bering. Notice the bump in freezing levels across the western half of the Aleutians, jumping from 2 upwards to around 8,000 feet in advance of that approaching North Pacific low. The greatest threat for icing will be out there through the central western Aleutians between 6,000 feet and a flight level of 18,000 feet. Also a pocket there with that weakening low to the north and west of St. Matthew and west of St. Lawrence between 2,000 and 10,000 feet. And taking a look at the upper level jet winds at 30,000 feet, most notably is a strong jet core south of the Aleutian chain with winds out of the west-northwest upwards in excess of 130 knots. And as we bring it down to mid-levels, 9,000 feet, we see the low-pressure circulation there just north of the central Aleutians with a broad area of 50 to 70 knot winds just south of the Aleutian chain. And then we have the winds circulating off to the north. We have southerly winds across the eastern Bering on up through the Bering Strait on the order of 40 to near 50 knots. And then as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, we see that well-defined circulation just north of the central Aleutians in the lower Bering. Strong winds 60 to 70 knots out of the south there cutting across the eastern Aleutians, and then on the backside, the western Aleutians, upwards of 55 knots. That translates to areas of severe turbulence possible in through the Aleutian chain, especially in the west as well as in the east. Surface to 3,000 foot turbulence there, considerable moderate and isolated severe. That moderate turbulence extends along the southwest coast, lower Kuskokwim Delta through Nunavik Island, the Pribilof Islands, and northward toward St. Lawrence. We also have an area of surface to 4,000 foot moderate turbulence along and just north there of the Yukon, central Yukon River, back up to just south of the Brooks Range. So that wraps up your flight weather, and if you are able to get out, have a safe flight.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. but threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected and the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice edge, we're going to continue to observe a westward drift of the ice as we have offshore flow there along the southwest and west coast. Notice that the ice has been retreating not just northward, but also will be retreating back toward the west away from the southwestern coast, especially their lower Kuskokwim on up through the Yukon Delta, where larger areas of ice have broken up and in the process of melting, and those polynias opening up. So overall, that trend will continue farther north. We anticipate the ice still in place, though rather breezy conditions will persist along areas of the Arctic and northwest coast here as we go through the day on Sunday. For the southeast panhandle, though, offshore flow, Lynn Canal 15 knots from the north, northeasterly there near Petersburg, and then further south, southeasterly winds 15 knots around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, the Dixon entrance. Waves so only 2-3 feet at best. Offshore flow along the outer coast there through the Gulf, easterly 15 to 20 knot winds and waves generally running around 6 feet. On Monday, we'll continue to see an offshore, more northerly flow there through the inner channels, as high as 30 knots down there along the length of Lynn Canal, with waves at 5-6 feet, falling off to only around 3 feet in the vicinity of Ketchikan. Offshore flow out of the northeast will continue along the outer Gulf Coast there at 15 to 20 knots and waves 6 to maybe as high as 8 or 9 feet. Little calmer conditions across the northwestern Gulf on Sunday. Variable winds around 10 knots, not only off the Kenai and northeast of Kodiak, but also up through Prince William Sound. Waves across the Gulf there generally only 5-6 feet. Lower Cook Inlet, see variable winds 10 to 15 knots, 2-3 foot waves. And then on Monday, winds may become a little more easterly there, especially at the entrance of Cook Inlet in northeast of Kodiak. Easterly 20 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet. More northerly winds up toward Cadet Arm and there through Prince William Sound, only though at around 10 knots with waves running a foot or two. Across Kodiak Island on Sunday, starting off variable winds around 10 knots there in Shelikof Strait, but as we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, southeast winds will pick up to 30 knots, Sand Point, Cold Bay southwestward. Waves either side of North Pacific or Bering running about 8-9 feet. And then on Monday, stronger gale force winds to 40 knots will envelop the southern half there of the Alaska Peninsula, with waves building 14 to 17 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to 11 feet on the Bering side. Now, low pressure that'll be working its way just north of the central Aleutians on Sunday. This is a storm force low, and we expect storm force winds of 50 knots from the southeast there through the eastern Aleutians, with gusts as high as 65 knots in the vicinity of Dutch Harbor. And then on the backside of the low, winds turn around to the northwest and north at about 45 knots. And waves west of Adak will be upwards of 20 to just over 25 feet. For Monday, the strong storm force winds work their way through the eastern Aleutians, 50 to 55 knot storm force winds, with waves building as high as 29 feet there south of Nikolsky, and areas around, at least on the Bering side, near Dutch Harbor, 10 feet with easterly flow there. But again, the winds are going to turn strongly to the northwest, storm force winds to 55 knots on the backside of the low. And looking at the southwest coast, winds will be ahead of that low from the southeast, 25 to 30 knots, though 40 knot gales there at St. Paul, St. George, with waves of 12 feet. That's going to shift the ice north and westward. Winds will still hold up though, 35 to near 40 knots there off the southwest coast. Waves 9 to as high as 14 feet where there is either open water or certainly the ice is broken up enough. And then along the Arctic coast, east-southeast winds around 10 knots, increasing to east-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots through the Bering Strait, lower Chukchi Sea, and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And that will likely help to maybe expand some polynyas there just off the shore ice there. And then winds do come down to just 5 to 10 knots northwest coast and Arctic coast, but then the lower Chukchi Sea, look for easterly winds about 20 knots out of Kotzebue Sound, and they're off of Wales and Port Clarence, with the ice still in place. And overall, that stronger low storm force low will work its way just north of the central Aleutians Sunday afternoon, so beware of that. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.